Did you know? Overnight, the US delivered a shock. A 50% tariff on Burkina Faso's white gold, shea butter, the lifeblood of more than 160,000 Sahel women. A map of West Africa appears, a secret document with a red stamp. Economic warfare. A piece of paper signed in Washington has pushed an entire country to the brink of famine. The question is this just trade, or is it a hidden war for sovereignty that 99% of the world doesn't know about? On the 1st of August, 2025, the United States announced a 50% tariff on all imports of shea butter from Burkina Faso. According to Reuters, this decision struck directly at the nation's most valuable export, a product known as women's gold, sustaining over 160,000 rural women across the Sahel. Overnight, warehouses filled with unsold stock, supply chains froze, and American distributors turned silent. International analysts quickly labeled the move economic warfare, warning it could destabilize livelihoods across West Africa and push Burkina Faso to seek new trade alliances. But that was only the beginning. What came next would test not just markets, but the very idea of sovereignty itself. The sun had barely risen over Ouagadougou when President Ibrahim Traoré convened an emergency council inside the modest presidential compound. The walls were bare, the air stifling, but the weight of the moment was heavier still. Ministers, cooperative leaders, and union heads gathered around a table scarred with age, a table that would soon witness history. Traoré's voice was calm, but it carried the steel of a soldier. They will not break us by starving our people. They want Burkina Faso to bow in silence. We will answer not with pleas, but with power. Outside the compound, the mood was darker. Women sat in circles in kaya, their hands stained with the paste of crushed shea nuts that could no longer find buyers. Drivers leaned against idle trucks in Bobo Dioulasso, unpaid and uncertain whether their next journey would ever come. Mothers whispered to each other in markets, "Will we still eat next month?" It was this silence, the silence of waiting, that Traoré despised most. He knew Washington had expected Burkina Faso to fold, to beg for exemptions or aid. Instead, he looked eastward. His intelligence reports spoke of interest from Beijing, of emissaries waiting for a signal. But it would not be a signal of desperation. It had to be strength. That afternoon, under the blazing Sahel sky, Traoré addressed the nation on live radio. His words spread like fire. "We are not beggars at the tables of empires. We are builders of our own destiny. From this moment, every hand that cracks a shea nut, every driver who waits in his cab, every child who watches her mother's struggle, you are the heartbeat of Burkina Faso. And together, we will not surrender." Across Africa, radio hosts replayed his speech. In Accra and Lagos, analysts debated whether this defiance was mere bravado or the birth of a doctrine. But in the villages of Burkina Faso, women lifted their heads. A leader had spoken. 3 days later, in a dimly lit chamber beneath the Ministry of Commerce, a clandestine meeting unfolded. The air smelled of dust and secrecy. Traoré sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 trusted aides, while across from him, 3 men in tailored suits whispered in Mandarin before removing their earpieces. They were emissaries from Beijing, not diplomats in public view, but architects of quiet deals. One of them slid a folder across the table. Inside were blueprints of processing plants, maps of proposed trade corridors, and financial figures that dwarfed anything the West had ever offered. Traoré studied the documents with the patience of a soldier inspecting a battlefield. He finally spoke, his tone deliberate. "Your offer is heavy with promise, but understand this, Burkina Faso is not for sale. We do not trade one master for another. If this partnership stands, it will stand on respect, not chains." The Chinese envoy hesitated, then bowed his head slightly. "President Traoré, we do not seek masters and servants, we seek equals. Africa's rise is in our interest, and in yours." The silence that followed was not weakness, it was calculation. Traoré could sense the shift in the room. The emissaries understood they were not dealing with another pliant leader desperate for aid. They were dealing with a man willing to gamble his nation's survival for sovereignty. Meanwhile, outside, the people of Ouagadougou had begun to whisper of caravans arriving at night, trucks carrying crates not marked with Western insignias, but with unfamiliar characters. Some said they were tools, others whispered weapons. Nobody knew for certain, but one truth began to spread through the dust of the Sahel. Burkina Faso was no longer waiting to be rescued. By the end of the week, the first signatures were placed on hidden contracts. Quietly, but decisively, Burkina Faso had taken its first step eastward. In Washington, analysts scrambled. In Paris, officials muttered in frustration. And in the villages of Burkina Faso, hope began to feel less like a dream and more like a plan. The moment the first signatures touched paper in that hidden chamber beneath Ouagadougou, a tremor rippled across the Western world. It wasn't loud, it wasn't public, but in the halls of Washington, Paris, and Brussels, it was as if an alarm had been triggered. Within 48 hours, a confidential report landed on the desk of a French intelligence chief. The language was clinical, but the implications were explosive. Burkina Faso is aligning economically and strategically with Beijing. Early signs indicate covert shipments of industrial machinery and possible defense technology. Recommend immediate countermeasures. Countermeasures. That was the word they always used, the polite mask for sabotage, manipulation, and destabilization. The shadow moves. Soon, the signs began to surface in Burkina Faso itself. Reports of sudden shortages appeared in Ouagadougou. Markets' fuel deliveries delayed, basic goods mysteriously stuck at border checkpoints. Foreign-owned banks began reviewing transactions, freezing lines of credit, stalling business. The intent was clear: strangle the economy, squeeze the people, force discontent. In Western newsrooms, headlines multiplied overnight. Is Traoré selling out to China? Burkina Faso risks becoming Beijing's pawn. Authoritarian drift in the Sahel. The media war had begun, designed not for truth, but for erosion. Erosion of trust, erosion of unity, erosion of hope. But what the West had miscalculated was the resilience of a people who had seen too much betrayal already. The streets of Ouagadougou. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, thousands of Burkinabe poured into Independence Square. Farmers, teachers, traders, students, all carrying placards scrawled with simple, defiant words. We are not for sale. Burkina Faso decides for itself. No more puppets. They were not chanting for China, nor for Russia. They were chanting for Burkina Faso, for the right to breathe free of interference. At the center of the square, a young woman named Aisha stood on the steps of a government building. Her voice carried like a blade through the crowd. We will not starve quietly. We will not be silenced by propaganda. This land is ours, and no one will dictate our future except us. The cheers thundered so loudly that even the French embassy's thick walls trembled with unease. Traoré response. That night, Ibrahim Traoré convened his council. He listened to intelligence briefings, to economic warnings, to whispers of infiltration. When he finally rose to speak, his words were sharp as steel. They think pressure will break us. They think we are alone. But let them watch closely. We will not bend. We will not crawl back to our chains. From this moment forward, Burkina Faso will show the world that sovereignty is not just a word, it is a fire, and once lit, it does not die. With that declaration, Traoré ordered the acceleration of the new projects promised in the secret Beijing folders, roads, processing plants, and a communications hub infrastructure designed not just for trade, but for independence. The West tightens its grip, but the West was not finished. New plans were drafted in the shadows, plans to isolate, to infiltrate, to break this rising defiance before it spread across Africa. For in the capitals of Europe, one fear haunted every strategy session: If Burkina Faso succeeds, others will follow. The whispers of hidden caravans and secret contracts did not remain whispers for long. In Washington, the Pentagon's Situation Room buzzed with restless urgency. Satellite images of Chinese cargo planes unloading in Ouagadougou flashed across digital walls. Documents marked "classified" were tossed on polished oak tables. One general leaned forward, his voice sharp. Burkina Faso is aligning with Beijing. If this spreads, if Mali and Niger follow, we lose the entire Sahel. This is no longer about one country, it's about a continent breaking free. At the same moment in Paris, the mood was darker, almost desperate. France, long accustomed to treating West Africa as a private chessboard, was watching its pieces vanish. A senior minister slammed his fist against the desk. Traoré is dismantling decades of influence in a single stroke. Roads, trade, even weapons. If China builds the corridors, we will be the ones locked out. But beyond closed doors, the unease was more visible. Western media outlets began broadcasting dramatic headlines. China, in Africa. Traoré turns his back on the West. Burkina Faso sells sovereignty to Beijing. New Cold War frontline emerging in the Sahel. Yet the people on the ground saw something different. Farmers in dusty villages whispered about tractors and irrigation systems arriving for the first time. Miners spoke of contracts that promised not extraction, but joint ventures. The gap between Western rhetoric and African reality widened with every passing day. Behind the scenes, covert operations began. Agents moved quietly, stirring dissent, funding opposition voices, and planting stories meant to fracture Traoré's growing support. The old playbook was in motion. If they could not control him, perhaps they could destabilize him. But the young captain seemed unshaken. He appeared at rallies with his sleeves rolled up, not in a palace but among his people. His words carried the weight of defiance. They tell you we are being sold. Number. We are the ones who are buying back our freedom. For the first time, the contracts are written in our language. For the first time, the terms are ours. The crowd roared, and somewhere in Washington, in Paris, in London, leaders felt a chill, because they understood something terrifying. Traoré was not just resisting, he was rewriting the rules. For months, whispers of Chinese convoys and Western discontent dominated the conversation. But then, an unexpected revelation shattered the narrative. It began with a leak. Anonymous files appeared online, stamped with the insignia of a European intelligence agency. Within them were detailed memos exposing something extraordinary. The so-called Chinese contracts in Burkina Faso were not simply deals of dependency. They were part of a triangular pact, a secret alliance between Burkina Faso, China, and a coalition of African states quietly uniting under Traoré's leadership. The documents revealed a deeper plan. The roads being laid were not only commercial corridors, they were strategic arteries connecting Sahel nations into a single block. Fiber optic cables beneath them promised digital independence. Energy pipelines were mapped to ensure regional self-sufficiency. What the West thought was China's encroachment was, in truth, Africa's quiet uprising. Western analysts were stunned. One line in the leaked memo sent shockwaves through global think tanks. This is not Beijing's project. This is Ouagadougou's project, with China as contractor, not master. The twist was undeniable. Traoré had flipped the script. Instead of becoming a client state, Burkina Faso had used China's capacity to accelerate Africa's sovereignty. He was not surrendering. He was outmaneuvering. As these revelations spread, African youth movements lit up social media. Hashtags like #AfricaForAfricans and #The New Sahel trended across the continent. Videos of Traoré declaring, "We are not pawns, we are players," went viral, reaching millions. But not everyone celebrated. In Western capitals, fury brewed. If the intelligence leaks were true, it meant their greatest fear was unfolding. Africa was no longer negotiating as fragmented nations, but as a coalition with leverage. The old colonial playbook, divide and dominate, was crumbling. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Traoré gave a rare televised address. Behind him was no foreign flag, no gilded hall, only the image of the continent etched in gold. His voice cut through the silence. Brothers and sisters, the world believed we were chained, but chains are only strong until you learn to melt them. We have not sold Africa. We have invested Africa in Africa. Today, we stand not as dependents of the East or the West, but as architects of our own destiny. The streets erupted. Crowds filled the boulevards, waving both Burkinabe flags and banners marked with the Pan-African colors. And suddenly, the West realized the true twist. They had not lost Africa to China. They had lost Africa to Africans themselves. The night air in Ouagadougou was heavy, but the city did not sleep. From the neighborhoods of Zogona to the villages beyond the dusty highways, radios buzzed with one refrain: Africa will rise. Burkina Faso, once spoken of only in terms of poverty and dependence, now stood at the center of a storm that shook the empires. Sanctions had failed, pressure had failed, and when the world expected silence, the people answered with song. Ibrahim Traoré walked the streets without fanfare, as he often did, his military cap tilted slightly forward, blending with his people. Children followed him barefoot, chanting, "Souveraineté, liberté." Old women stretched out their hands, not for charity, but for reassurance that their sacrifices had meaning. And everywhere he went, there was the same spark, the unmistakable belief that destiny had shifted. The sanctions designed to starve the nation had instead planted the seed of unity. Farmers organized in cooperatives, stronger than before. Women who once sold shea butter in isolation now joined networks stretching across West Africa. Engineers, inspired by the crisis, poured their energy into homegrown solutions, solar grids, irrigation pumps, processing plants. Each challenge was being transformed into a weapon of resilience, and as the world watched, Traoré's voice carried not just to Burkina Faso, but across the entire continent. They wanted to break us. Instead, they awoke us. They wanted us divided. Instead, they made us one. Africa is not a beggar. Africa is a builder. We will not crawl, we will rise. And when we rise, the world will feel the weight of our dignity. The crowd erupted, not with mere applause, but with the rhythm of drums, the clapping of hands, the ululation of women who knew their children's tomorrow would not be chained to yesterday's sorrow. This was no longer just about Burkina Faso. From Bamako to Conakry, from Lagos to Harare, the words lit a flame. A movement was born. A continent had remembered its strength. And so, under the Sahel sky, amidst dust and drums, the story of a soldier turned leader became something larger than one man. It became a vow that Africa would never again bow. Do you believe Traoré's defiance is the first spark of Africa's true independence? Brothers and sisters, this is not just a story, it is a mission. If Traoré's stand inspires you, let your voice be heard. Leave your thoughts in the comments, share your perspective, and let the world know Africa is not alone. Your like, your comment, your voice, they are the drums that carry this message further. Together, we rise. Together, we resist. Together, we build the future.